When there's less human in the loop to make decisions, the more important it will be to ensure that there is no bias.
Hello, and welcome to Hired the Podcast. I am Travis Miller, and this is a conversation about the world of work with some of the best and brightest minds in the business. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by Britta Muehlenberg, the Chief Operations Officer at Acrolinx and former Chief People Officer there as well. She's over 2 decades of human resource operations and startup experience. As Chief Operations Officer, Britta leads Acrolinx's customer division, ensuring customer retention and satisfaction. Britta, thanks for being with us here today. Appreciate it.
Well, welcome too, and thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be with you today.
Absolutely, and I'm so curious, Britta. You not too long ago made the transition from Chief People Officer to Chief Operations Officer, and you've spent vast majority of your career in Human Resources, VP of Human Resources, Chief People Officer. What has it been like shifting to a bit broader focus when you're not solely focused on the people at the organizations you're working?
Well, yeah. So first of all, this is my second time around that I'm Chief Operating Officer of a company. In my previous company, I had pretty much the same transition, starting in a people function and then moving into operations with a little bit of a different, functional cut, if you wish. I was responsible there to work actually with the product and engineering teams, and I had IT and cloud operations under my wing there as well. So this is not very new to me. And I believe that people and operations go extremely well together because, being in charge of, especially in a tech company like Acrolinx, the most important asset of this company are its people, the brains, the talents, right? And making sure that we leverage the talents to, the best success of the company is ultimately what I do in my operations role. I make sure that all the great talent that we have collaborates well, interacts well, and ultimately creates value for our customers, who, by the way, are also people, right? So, working with our customers is a pleasure for me because I have people on the other side of the table as well, and making sure that their needs are met and their experience is a great one. There are quite a lot of similarities between being in charge of people and being in charge of customers. So again, I think that people and operations have to go hand in hand anyway, and combining the two in one leadership role makes a ton of sense for me and has not been a very difficult transition for me at all.
For those listening that aren't familiar with Acrolinx, I find it terribly refreshing to hear somebody working for a generative AI company say that people are their most important asset. Because you read so much in the news and hear so much scaremongering of people saying that AI is going to take all our jobs away, and I personally don't see it, and to hear that coming from someone like you is incredibly refreshing. How do you see artificial intelligence affecting the job market, the hiring landscape, and how people focus on who to bring on board and how to utilize them?
That's a $1 million question that you're asking me here. And there's a lot of aspects to it. But let me start by saying that at Acrolinx is a company that's been around for a while, right? We've been in business for 20 years, and we've always been an AI company, right? Way before anybody else was thinking about or knowing anything about AI. So it sits as the heart it's the DNA of our company. And I don't think that being human and AI really contradict each other at all. And so while there are many companies, or actually all companies around the globe, looking at what's happening in the generative AI space right now and trying to figure out how to best leverage the technology and how to incorporate the technology into their workflows, and being, some of them being really scared about what's coming and not knowing, the uncertainty of it. That's not so much present at Acrolinx. We're all very excited about this because this finally helps us, because many more people understand actually what we do and why Acrolinx is important. So, so that maybe to start off with. And then to your question about how will it change, nobody knows at this point. I think it's the one mistake that we can do is to assume that it won't have an impact. I do believe that it'll impact phenomenally and very, very significantly the way in which we work. Having said that, organizations, from my perspective, are organisms more than they are engines. And that's always the way in which I have looked at organizations. And that's not going to change. So there's people interacting. They might be doing different things and they might be using different skills. They might be leveraging the technology in different ways. Generative AI might and will help us a lot with efficiency, speed of innovation, speed of creating value and being productive and all of that. But, ultimately, there will still be people in organizations doing business with people in other organizations, and that's not going away. So the need for humanness in leadership, in coaching, in giving direction, in inspiration, in training, and also, as you said, in recruiting and selecting the right talents for an organization, that's going to stay the same. We're just going to have a different tool in our tool belt that we can use. And I mean, I've been asked this question so many times, right? How does this impact the way in which people, teams work? There are a million ways in which generative AI can support workflows in the people organization. You mentioned recruiting, right? Yes, for sure. I mean, using generative AI to create job descriptions, to go look for profiles, to map profiles with requirements or job specs, that's all great because it can be done, especially if you need to do it at scale, it can be done by a machine. But I think this does not take away the need for us to be very specific about making sure we don't have a bias baked into these models that are used to make those selections. And I think actually when there's less human in the loop to make decisions, the more important it will be to ensure that there is no bias in the models and in the technology that we use. The same is true for creating content for learning, right? It's the old concept, garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have great ideas and good foundation as input for whatever it is that you're using to create learning content, then it'll be hard to use or to best leverage that learning content that is AI generated, right? So basically what I'm saying is that even though the machine's going to help us and the technology is going to help us be much more efficient and quicker and focus on other things, it'll not take away humans and organizations and in the world of work. And as long as there are humans in the world of work, there will be a need for leadership. There will be a need for coaching. There will be a need for, communication and ensuring that there is a culture that needs to be nourished. And so those things will still be, and maybe even more so, be top of mind of leaders in people functions, I think. Plus, I mean, leaders not only, I have to correct myself, this is true for any leader, not just leaders in people functions.
Are there any specific ways that you've started to utilize this tool or seen it shift or shape your role or your team or your department in any given ways?
Well, so we're using our own tool, of course, right? We're making sure that the content that we create is checked with Acrolinx. So our job descriptions, our internal communications, anything that we create here. And that's, by the way, that's true for all of Acrolinx, not just the people team, is being checked by our own technology there. And we're using that. And in other ways, as I said, it's at the very center of who we are to be in touch with AI. So we're not afraid of it so much. But as any other company, Acrolinx also has to create policies around it because there is risk attached to it, right? Data protection, those kinds of things. We might be a bit less hesitant in approaching and using these technologies. And we've just last week, a couple of weeks ago, have launched our own generative AI component in our product, and everybody was very excited about it. To be able to use it in Acrolinx, right? So we don't have to go to other places. We could just use Acrolinx for this purpose. But in other ways, I have to admit, not yet. I mean, it's not like we're using top-notch generative AI tools to create our internal learning content. It hasn't gone that far, but it might, and I guess it will.
How do you think that's going to shape how the learning content is created, and is it going to shape differently how the content is consumed?
The consumption piece is an interesting one because that has to do, I guess that's less an AI question, but more a question of, because the channels are clear at the moment, right? That they're video, they're audio, they're reading materials, or a combination of them. They're video and also interaction in pre-recorded training materials might get more sophisticated, right? The way in which you interact while you're doing online training, that will probably change. But I think that for the generation piece, I do see that it'll be impacted quite significantly, because that the whole idea of online training, I think the biggest piece of it is making sure that you create high quality content, right? That is didactically valuable, that is entertaining, that is engaging, it's attractive, so that people stay on, and that it meets the purpose. It does have the challenge, if you want to use generative AI for the learning content, you do have the challenge of making sure that the model you're using has a way of tapping into knowledge, the knowledge that you're trying to get across, because it's usually very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know now, there's lots of hallucinations. So you have to find ways in which you need to, have, specifically train your models or ground your models for that specific purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And then always the language piece, right? You want to make sure that the language that's being used to train the model is free of bias, is inclusive, and ultimately adheres to the style that the creating company would like to apply.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd imagine that's extremely challenging. I know that you recently certified in Brené Brown's Dare to Lead training, and how do you? I can't imagine how much work and time and effort that took for you to become certified in that. How do you possibly train a machine to create that equivalent content that is as valuable as someone like you, who has all of this, not only this previous knowledge, but this new knowledge? How can that possibly compete with someone like you and what you bring, how you bring that to your team?
Yeah, I think you have to differentiate between the different types of training, or what it is that you want to train, right? Training knowledge, I would think, is easier, because knowledge is easier to capture than human connection and empathy. I mean, how do you train empathy through a model?
Mm-hmm.
That's really difficult. And I mean, you mentioned Brené Brown, and we went through that whole process as a leadership team, and I don't see a future in which this experience can be done solely by by an AI or a bot or anything. We had a certified trainer who did that with us, and I mean, just the presence of this person, the beautiful Caroline Shop-Kelleran, who did that with us, her presence, her energy, and having the energy of the group, even though it was all done remotely, right? We had like 35 people in the room, in our virtual room, getting together every week for the training, but creating the energy, creating the momentum, sharing experiences and building on that. I don't think that'll be, you'll be able to replace that, or, or have that kind of depth and humanness in a purely robotic setting, to be quite frank. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it will happen, or maybe this world is going to try to do that. I doubt it'll be effective.
Yeah. I saw in the news recently, I'm very curious to see how it works, but I read that for the Olympics, they're using Al Michaels' voice to create custom AI commentary specifically for the individual watching it. And is that going to create an uncanny valley? I know it's not Al Michaels. I know it's not this famous person that I've watched on television and seen comment on sports for decades. I know it's not this person, but it's his voice. Am I going to be able to receive that? And I think about something like this. Could you have a training meeting with a robot version of Brene Brown? It's her voice. The model has been built on her training, but it's not her. I just don't know if that's something that us as humans would ever be able to take at the same level of value.
I would agree. There's so much sensuality in this very human experience of specifically this topic. I mean, the topic that we were dealing with was vulnerability in the workplace. It's courage, it's trust. There's, shame. Those are topics that are extremely difficult, and it was a very bodily, very sensual experience to listen to your coworkers share their stories, or share your own story, or just discussing the concepts, and either in the large group or in the smaller group, and that is that needs immediate response. And this is going to be, I think it's going to be impossible to create this momentum and create this atmosphere without any human interaction, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, again, I think it really depends a lot on, are you training knowledge, or are you training something else to kind of coach human behavior, train human behavior, speak about values? I think that's going to be very, very hard to replace, albeit Brene was with us, even though she wasn't doing the training, right? What has happened in the past, and it's very effective, is that we were watching videos where she would speak to parts of her book and some of the concepts, and so she did join us virtually in a way, but that was not interactive. That was like interspersed, and that'll work. And we kind of consume other people's voices and faces and facial expressions. And you and I were not in the same room, right? And
Right.
We're still having an engaged conversation. So it's possible, but I think having something that is predetermined, even if it's intelligent and can react, reading a room, picking up a sentiment, and then reacting to that. I'm not an engineer. I don't know, what's all possible, but I would find that very hard. And the question is, would we want that? That it's just, we had sessions and where there were tears, and that, you don't want that to be invoked or, enticed by a machine. That's deeply human. It's deeply human. So, and back to my point of organizations being organisms with a soul and a heart and people in them, it's culture and feelings, and that's not going away. We're humans.
I caught that quote earlier, and I really liked it, that an organization is an organism, not an engine. And I thought that was very poetic. And I want to hear more about the training. What did you take away from these sessions with Brene's team, and what are you taking to the rest of your organization and trying to, what knowledge are you trying to pass on to them?
Yeah. Well, maybe I should start from why did we did we embark on that journey? And it was about the need for more courage, in the organization to put the difficult conversations on the table and to address the difficult and more challenging topics head on instead of avoiding them. And, like not speaking to people directly about issues at hand. And because if you don't have conflict, if an organization is so respectful with one another that you're absolutely trying to avoid any kind of friction, any kind of conflict, that can lead to a lack of innovation. And, you don't solve issues. They get stale and they get stuck and build. And so that was something that we wanted to avoid, especially in a fully remote setting where it is extremely valuable and necessary to solve issues, because otherwise they will fester and they will grow and will become, bigger. So that was the initial purpose. And ultimately, that is the outcome, right? We have, through this program, grown together as a leadership team, a wider leadership team. So this was all people leaders, so to speak, in the organization who got together there. And then we took, after doing the certified course with the leaders, we did what they call the Daring Teams Rollout Program, where 15 of us leaders then took this program to the rest of the organization in smaller groups. And we just finalized our second go around of that. So I'm super happy to see that we're continuing the journey. And it's phenomenal to see how it has shaped and changed the way in which we interact as an organization. And the most visible element of that is language. Back to our first topic, right? Or to our Acrolinx topic, maybe, because we have learned not only a set of tools and concepts that we can all allude to and rely on in our daily interaction, but it is a set of language and vocabulary that we can use to make ourselves heard and seen, right? So as an example, there's specific language in the concept or in Dare to Lead that speaks of having a rumble as instead of having a difficult conversation. Or, I have I have an idea and I've made a sketch of what I want it to look like, but it's called a shitty first draft. Excuse my French here. We call it a shitty first draft. And if somebody now shares that, then okay, it's for me to look at, but I know it's not done. Or the idea of back channeling. If I don't address a topic or a question or an issue head on, but I leave a meeting feeling uncomfortable, but then talking to somebody else about the topic, that's back channeling. And we can address these things. Yeah. Or, speaking of invisible armies, speaking of stories that we make up in our heads. So there's many, many, many examples of vocabulary that we can use and that is being used every single day. So I'm super happy to hear somebody mention something about this program every single day. And it's refreshing. And we're also doing refreshers with the teams now because people have asked for it, because you forget. I mean, if you don't read it all the time. But what I've seen is that we have learned how to be clear and kind. We are more clear in what it is that we see. There is more courage in addressing, and it's less about avoiding conflict, right? It's less about, hey, give me rules so that I don't have this issue. You will have misunderstandings and you will have friction. It's inevitable. We have 180 people who are based and located around the world, who have very, very different cultural backgrounds. Only around about half of our team is English native. So you have the language barrier, you have a cultural barrier, and you're only working together via a screen. That makes it really hard. There will be conflict. There will be misunderstanding. And it is absolutely important for us to get that out of the way and to be as empathetic as we can be and as generous, always assuming the person in front of me is trying their best. They're not here to hurt me or to do harm to me or to my cause. We're all on the same page. We just need to figure out how. And that's beautiful to see.
How have you seen this teaching received and utilized across the different cultures?
That's an interesting question. But ultimately, I think it's less about the cultures. It's more about the normal distribution of people, right? You have your normal distribution curve, and as usual, you have this like 20 to 30%, maybe 20% of like people who are really engaged and who love this and who embrace it and will take it to the next level and adopt it immediately. Then you have the bulk of the people who are a little more skeptical and hesitant and will, see how it goes. And then you have your group of people who are really, really super skeptical and actually against it and who don't like it and who will not adopt it. But that didn't discourage me because that's a normal set of things. But I did not see specifically different levels of adoption or engagement or receptiveness to this depending on culture, I must say. I mean, we did have the language barrier a little bit because we did it in English, obviously. And there's, some of this language is very specific. And there, we had a few people who were struggling a little bit to understand the language that was being used. But we also had German, German content. And so I think we maneuvered those issues. And so I would say it wasn't a matter of culture or regional, or location, but more so the normal split of human receptiveness to this.
Yep, that's pretty normal. I want to hear your thoughts on creating a culture of healthy conflict. How do you do that where you're encouraging people to get in disagreements, and how were you able to almost emphasize that this is about the topic. This conflict is not personal. And does it ever devolve into that?
That's a journey, right? It's a journey that we're on every day. And I don't think we're perfect. And there will be situations where there is, hurt feelings and where people, perceive something as being personal. But generally what I see and what the leadership team has really, really done well is to encourage the direct conversation. And, you know how it goes sometimes in very hierarchical organizations. Issues bubble up to the very top, they're being escalated, and then they trickle down the other side. But the people who have the issue together, who do have that, factual or matter-of-fact conflict, they never speak to one another. And then it kind of hangs in the air and it doesn't get resolved. And we all encourage our teams to have that conversation with their peers. And we provide coaching as to how could that happen. But we've seen that increase actually to not kind of go through the ranks and then down the other side, but to actually have this conversation directly with the person on the other side. And it's a constant learning path. And so, but it's working. It is working. And I was speaking of back channeling earlier.
Yeah.
Seeing that and spotting that and calling it out has been tremendously helpful, because we can all say, you're back channeling right now. Can you go have a conversation with this person? And it's uncomfortable. It's, oftentimes I see people when they come to me and ask for advice and how am I going to solve this and complaining, with me. And I tell them, go have a conversation with this person. And they're I don't want to. It's really uncomfortable. But I don't let them off the hook. So that's it's something that we all, and it's the same for me, right? I need to have my conversations head on. But and that's not always easy. It's not always easy to have those conversations, but I try to embrace it every day.
How often do they back out and just go, nah, never mind, it's not that big a deal, I'm just not going to have the conversation?
Well, I don't know that because I can't follow up on everything, but I do see that the level of readiness to have difficult conversations has gone up. And also because of this idea of being clear, but being kind is important, right? You can be very clear and you can set very clear boundaries, but you have to be, it's not mutually exclusive from being a kind person. You can be very, very strong in your statement, but you don't have to be, mean. You can still be kind, right?
So there's been a strong focus on the encouragement to have difficult conversations, but I want to shift a little bit and talk about the difficulty of having positive conversations. I read an interview you did in HR Daily Advisor recently, and you said, early on in my career, I'd always been very heads down, diligent person and never paid too much attention to sharing what I did with others. I realized fairly quickly that this was actually to my detriment. And unfortunately, I think that it is a very typical female pattern to hope that people will notice the good things that you do. And as I was reading that, I thought of the Barbie movie, the speech that America Ferrera gives, and she says, you have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. And I wanted to hear your thoughts because I can see your point that it can be a problem more prevalent in females. But I know it's something that I run into and I see people run into all the time, the difficult challenges of being able to proudly state what you've done and what you've accomplished without coming across like a braggart, a blowhard, someone with ego. How have you faced that challenge, and what have you do to encourage it in your people?
Yeah, I think that's a very fine line that you need to find, right? Between bragging or not bragging, but still talking about the things that you have done. I think first and foremost, it's about, success is usually not something that you do on your own. So it's as a leader or, if you have larger teams that work with you, it's super important to kind of share the joy of the success and not just own the success and say, hey, I did that, but actually the team did that, right? So that's number one. Number two is I do believe that it's important to gain real estate. If you want to progress, if you want to develop, if you want to grow, it's about creating awareness about yourself. It's almost like a marketing campaign a little bit, right? And you don't need to have a huge billboard with all your good successes on them, but it is about creating real estate and by making sure that what it is that you do is being seen and heard. And that is something that for me, it's not my DNA, but I had to learn it, right? To be very intentional about where do I share, where do I try to create attention? And honestly, people have so much going on. There's so much information. It's this overflowing of things that are on people's plates, and you want to grab attention. You want to make sure they see and hear what you have to say. That is, you will know that, right? This is like so hard. It's becoming more and more difficult. And the same is true, I believe, in your achievements, right? Making sure that you connect what it is that you do with the success of the larger cause is important. Repeating it is important. And I don't think it's necessarily, it needs to be fueled by ego, right? I do believe that if it's fueled by the cause of making sure the success is seen, and because you don't do things just to look good. I don't. I do the things that I do to progress the company that I work with, or to progress the team, or to get ahead with my with my objectives. And I think as long as you connect the things that you do with that, and not so much with your own person, I think that'll do the job. But it is necessary to do it. It's not, people will not sit there and wait for you to, or they won't go look for the things that somebody has done well. As humans, we tend to have more focus on negative things. It's our DNA. We can't help it, right? So that is what will catch our attention much more easily than the good things. So we have to repeat them. We have to talk about them.
I've also noticed that the more you do it for others, the more they'll do it for you.
Very true. Very true statement. That's, being a leader for such a long time and seeing many other leaders around me and learning from the good and, maybe checking off my list from some that I didn't find were so good. I think one thing that stuck with me is the whole idea of being a servant leader, right? People don't work for me. I actually work for them and we work together. So, and I think that's a big shift in how leadership is perceived. There were days where that was very different, but today, at least for me, I don't have this feeling of, my teams, they don't work for me. I work for them. I make sure that they have everything they need to be successful. I make sure that we kind of get the blockers out of the way. I make sure that they feel that like they're in a safe space and they can thrive. And that is a very different idea from, sitting in your corner office and waiting for people to kind of report back to you what it is that they've done greatly.
Mm-hmm. I forget who I was talking. Noah, do you remember who it was I was talking to that they talked about the idea of, as a leader, the people who work on your team or work at your company, they're not employees. They're almost your customers. And it's your job to continue to provide value to them all the time in order for them to continue to, for lack of a better term, pay you through the work that they're doing and the product that they're helping to put out there and the revenue that they're generating for your company. Mm-hmm. And I just love that idea that, the people aren't working for me. I am working for them. And I need to ensure that this is a place where they want to continue to provide value. But just an interesting idea that I really, really loved.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's, we at Acrolinx, we measure people engagement on a regular basis because that for us is a very important, it's a KPI. It's actually a company KPI of ours. But we do that because we want to know, the level of engagement and how eager are people to be working at Acrolinx, how strong is their emotional bond to the company. It's not about how satisfied are they. That also plays a role, but that's not all of it. It's about really how strong is their emotional connection with Acrolinx. And the things, if you look at the elements or the levers that kind of go into this scoring, it's about giving people purpose, giving people direction, making sure what they do has a meaning, making sure they know somebody cares about them and cares for them, making sure that they feel like they can grow and develop, and also even all the way down to very basic things. Do they have the tools they need to do their job? Do they know what it is that is expected of them? Mm-hmm. And also, do you give them the chance to show their superpowers every day? Mm-hmm. Right? So those are the elements that we ask about and that we want to find out about. And ultimately, it's on us as an employer to make sure that those things are in place and that we show appreciation and show, enable growth, enable development, but also provide purpose so that people know the why they get up and get to work every morning.
Is that the Gallup 12 that you're using to measure that, or is there some other
Yes,
tools?
It is. No, it's the Gallup Q12, and we enrich that with some other questions, but that's the main score that we use. Yes.
Good 12. How have you seen that shift? And I apologize for not knowing this. Have you always been a fully remote company, or is that a more recent development?
Yes and no. So Acrolinx has always been geographically dispersed in over Europe and the US. And there have always been a sprinkle of people who were, some in Japan, a little bit in Australia. But with about 2.5 years ago, we decided to go remote first and to start hiring globally, at least for some functions, right? There are some roles where it's more difficult because you have time zone barriers and you have language barriers and etc. But for the majority of our roles, we are fully remote, and we are not a large company, but we have about 20 countries that we work in. And so it was a very clear decision to do that. We still have offices, our headquarters in Berlin and a small office in Concord, in close to Boston. But yeah, so the fully remote and that setting has only started about 2.5 years ago.
Because the one question on the Gallup 12 that I think about a lot with fully remote employees and fully remote teams is, do I have a best friend at work? And that's the one big piece of the hybrid remote framework that I just wonder about. And I don't know, I honestly can't say, I don't know how necessary it is to have a best friend at work, but I wonder how much of that has changed and shifted over the last 4 years or so.
Yeah, that's an excellent topic, Travis. We could probably have an entire podcast just based on that question, or on that topic. It's the most discussed question in our company. And I've had everything from, yes, of course, this is important. And yes, of course, I have a best friend here, up, all the way to, this is work. Well, why would I have a best friend? And I don't ever have a best friend at work, because my best friends is just this one person on the planet. So it's a huge topic. It's very, very wildly discussed. But for me, people don't see that this is not a yes, no question.
Mm-hmm.
It's a scale of 5, right? How would you rate your, your social connectivity with your peers, with your coworkers? That is ultimately the question. And whether we like it or not, the level of emotional connection with my employer is different if somebody who I consider a friend works there too. It's just different. It's a fact. And so the question is relevant from my perspective, at least. And then we can discuss this. It is, back to the fact that we're all humans and we need to bond and to, create connection. We need to be in touch physically. It's oxytocin that flows when we touch each other, when we're close to each other. So, that's just who we are, and we're wired for that. So there is always a very strong need to get people together. And so I think being fully remote is not a savings idea, because you have to invest in getting people together physically, I believe. And so it's about making sure that happens, but also making sure that where that is not possible all the time, that we pay a lot of attention to that, where you create opportunities for people to engage with one another outside of work topics, right? So we're very creative, and I think we can still do better. Very creative about setting up book clubs, setting up. We have an active club, so we've got a Slack channel where we share our activities, and where we do active challenges. Everybody does them in their own time and in their own region, but we kind of throw it in together, and we kind of work out together, and we cheer each other on. That is one. Then we have a cats and dogs channel where people share images of their cats and dogs. We even have a home automation channel where the nerds in the company can share their latest and greatest about their home automation. And it's a very active channel. So we have a Share the Love channel where people can share things that kind of makes their heart flow over, where there's a lot of charitable donation stuff in there, or just volunteer work. So you have to be a bit creative in making sure people see each other as humans, and not just through, in a Zoom meeting or in the next Zoom meeting and in the next Zoom meeting. But it's possible, right? You need to provide a canvas for people to paint a portrait of themselves. And we're also trying to be very human as leaders, right? So for example, the entire executive leadership team, we always check in with all of our new employees, our new hires. We get them together, check in with them 15, 20 minutes to say hi, to introduce ourselves, to talk about what it is that we do. Chief operating officer can be anything, right? So I share what I do. And we always have, some of us have a slide, and some of us just speak to who we are as people, right? We talk about where we live and about our children or our pets and what it is that we like to do in our spare time, just so people see that we're also humans, by the way. We're not just important people who have huge titles and, are very scary, but we're actually humans. And that is not easy in a fully remote setting, but I believe it's possible. Again, it's a journey. I wouldn't say we've got it all figured out, but we're learning and it's exciting.
Those channels that you set up, was that something that was an initiative from the chief people officer, or was that something that organically happened from people just being like, I got some buds here that we're all into food and cooking. Here's our food channel.
We have a food channel too, as you may imagine. That's both, actually. Both. We've had a few that were initiated by myself, some that were created by my team, but others that just happened because people said, we have a joint interest here. Let's start a Slack channel. Let's start a community about that. But it needs nourishing. It doesn't just happen, right? It needs nourishing and constant engagement. Yes.
Well, there's the word is community, and creating an environment where communities can flourish. Britta, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate it. If people are interested in finding out more about you or about Acrolinx, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Oh, I would say the usual, right? Find me on LinkedIn, and happy to connect there. And Acrolinx is also on LinkedIn and obviously our website. So if you want to learn more about us, visit acrolinx.com.
Britta Muehlenberg, this has been Hired the Podcast. Really, really appreciate the conversation. Thank you, as always, to Noah Cuff, our producer. Thanks so much, everyone, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.